Hi, it's Michael and David here, presenting Small Business Banter. A healthy micro and small business sector means a successful economy and a more vibrant society. Small Business Banter is about helping regional business owners better prepare for the current challenges and also for the next stage of business success. I'm Michael Kerr, founder of Kerr Capital, advisors to business owners. Each week with David Gregory, CEO of the Small Business Mentoring Service, we'll interview a different small business expert or a fellow business owner and operator. And they're going to share their best tips and insights for you, the listener. Small Business Banter is brought to you from the studios of 104.7 Gippsland FM and heard across Australia on the Community Radio Network. Thanks also to our supporters, Kerr Capital and the Small Business Mentoring Service. Okay, on today's episode of Small Business Banter, I'm very pleased to welcome in Andrew Clements. Andrew is, amongst other things, a legal consultant with the Melbourne office of global law firm King & Wood Mallesons. He's got 30 years or more experience in both tax and legal issues related to employee share schemes, which is what we're going to be talking all about today. He's also the current chair of Employee Ownership Australia, which is an independent not-for-profit based organisation, and it promotes employee ownership in Australia with members from listed companies with employee share schemes through to unlisted startups and small privately owned enterprises. He's got considerable involvement in the tax and corporate reviews of the regulation in relation to employee ownership going across Australia at the moment. He's recently appeared in a Parliamentary Inquiry into employee ownership instituted or constituted by the Tax and Revenue Committee. And he's got a major focus on developing effective succession models through employee ownership. So he's working internationally with one of the founding fathers, I think, of the movement, Graham Nuttall, UK policy expert and author of a book. And he's also, Graham's had an influence on this area, right across the globe. So it's great to have Andrew in today. Thanks very much for your time, Andrew.
I appreciate it, Michael. It's just a great opportunity to talk about employee ownership.
It is indeed. It's something that's obviously very dear to your heart, but also something that seems to be gathering a little bit of momentum, if not a lot of momentum, across Australia at the moment. So given your personal background, extensive background, could you just give us just a high-level overview to start with of what employee ownership is all about and where it's at in Australia at the moment?
Yeah, sure, Michael. I think the important thing out of all of this is to abstract a little bit and say what it's not. In one sense, what it's not is simply about providing a tax concession. It's something that needs to be focused and directed to give employees ostensibly two things. A level of influence and control in relation to the business, so influence and control, and combine that with an opportunity to enjoy some of the economic rewards. Now, they may well be just the periodic profits, or they may be the long-term growth in the enterprise. But that's a sort of esoteric expression of it. As with all things, there's lots of detail, but the really important question when you're looking at employee ownership is, what is it you're trying to achieve? What's the end goal?
And is that determining what that end goal is? Does that initially start with the current owner of the business and looking at how to make the business more profitable, more sustainable, or as a succession plan?
A combination of things. Really, it depends on the segment. So if you look at it at one end of the spectrum, it might be someone who's got a mature business, established, it's going well. They're a baby boomer, and they're thinking about what is it that I'm going to do, and my family aren't necessary successes in relation to the business. They don't have interest and or expertise, how do I pass this on to someone? How could I possibly keep an ongoing interest in it, but not have me committed for it 24/7? So that's one end of the spectrum. I guess the other end of the spectrum is in terms of business life cycle. I'm starting up a new venture. A couple of young guys, we've just come out of a consulting firm. We're going to be the next, insert square brackets, Google, Apple, whatever. We've got a great idea. And I need to provide some upside to employees, so they're going to go on this journey with me. So you kind of look at that, and they're very different purposes. At one end, it's providing the opportunity for employees to come on a journey. The other end is to give people the ability to take value, take access, and a transition of the business. So to go to your point, it depends almost entirely on where business is at and what's driving their needs.
Okay, so we've got two ends of a spectrum. We've got mature businesses, and we've got young and up-and-coming businesses. And so we'll come back to what might be different about those. But for owners, what are the top line, the couple of things that are really beneficial for them as an owner?
Yeah. I mean, it's great actually, because there's a really cool report that was done by the Office of the Chief Economist, which shows that I'm a nerd, that I could think of a report from the Office of the Chief Economist being cool. But it actually gives a really good insight into employee ownership. And when you read it, it talks about lower employee churn, higher sales, higher profitability, greater value-added growth, all exist when you've got employee ownership in a venture. But the really interesting thing is, and I think the really important thing for your audience is, the research shows that they're greater in a small business unlisted environment than they are in a mature listed environment. The benefits. So there's much more upside for employee ownership in a small business venture. The challenge, which is the corollary of all of this, is that there's currently less take-up of employee ownership in small business than there is in mature businesses, particularly in Australia. So to go to the nub of your question, lots of upside in terms of growth, engagement, and all the things that you'd expect.
Okay, and so it makes sense in a small business environment. There's fewer employees, so what they do or don't do on a day-to-day basis really counts. So I guess if they've got a share of the business or aspire to have a share of the business, then it's not a long bow to draw to say that their performance and their effectiveness and their interest would be higher, leading to better financial results.
Yeah, and there's this sort of great anecdotal evidence that of businesses where, and I was talking to Graham the other evening about this in terms of employee ownership trusts, where a venture established, put an employee ownership arrangement in place, and suddenly the employee group started saying, well, we don't need to spend money on these things. We can do this more efficiently in a leaner way without this structure or this expenditure. And it's just making sure there's a shared vision of making the business work.
Yeah. And look, it's probably been a well-trodden path with internet startups, tech startups for quite some time. Even back .com1, I was involved in and there was an employee share scheme, but it was all, it was all quite speculative as to where the business would end. So for we have a large number of SMEs in Australia, as we all know. A lot of them, I think, 60 to 70% are owned by individuals or families, over the age of 50 odd. So is that, succession, exit planning for them, going to be where this really might take hold?
Absolutely. I think that it is the area that Employee Ownership Australia are getting the greatest number of inquiries.
Okay.
And they're almost scripted. It's, I really want to do this. I know that it can be done because I've, somewhere else in the world's done it, but I just don't know how to do it. but I need to find something that enables me to provide this business back to my employees, or keep it in my community, or allow it to continue, or allow me to have an ongoing engagement in it.
Right.
So it's a really strong message. And I think particularly in the current economic climate, it's more important than ever. Because you asked me before, Michael, what are the observations about employee ownership? One of the pieces that comes through is they're much more robust in the times of economic decline. They're much more likely to survive than a non-employee owned business.
Right. So, that evidence we talked about at the start, your closer association with Graham Nuttall and the work that's being done in the UK, and so is that some of the? There's a lot more evidence. It's been a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take up
yeah. It would be great. It would. There's a paucity of evidence in Australia because there aren't as many reports. The UK has huge research. And for those who are interested, the Nuttall report, which is now probably 5 to 10 years or 10 years old, and that you can access through our website. We can pass details on.
We will do that.
Yeah, but it has a great exposition of the data and the research across a whole range of areas as to where employee ownership has been really, really helpful.
Okay.
And again, to go to the point of sort of your observation made earlier about different ends of the spectrum, particularly around the baby boomer succession, it's the real sweet spot because it's an established business and all of the things that we talked about before are much easier to leverage.
Yeah, look, and those jobs in those businesses are, as you say, more important than ever. And, without an obvious leader to take it over, jobs at risk, it gets worse in regional areas where the dependence and reliance on these SMEs in a small regional town it's so critical to the infrastructure of the town, the commercial infrastructure, that those businesses are sustained beyond the current ownership. And so it's interesting also to look at it from an employee's perspective. Is it a bit of a challenge, a step up to become an owner? What does that look like? How do they handle the change?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, again, if you go to the empirical evidence on it, what's the outcome of it? The outcome of it is much, much greater engagement, collaboration, and engagement. People actually want to be there. When all else in life fails, do something you really want to do. And again, you've then got through enhanced business performance, greater economic outcome, financial benefits. But I guess the thing that I always go back to on this, Michael, is this is not just about financial benefits. They're an outcome. But this model of ownership produces that outcome through a whole range of levers.
Look, and I think you hinted at it earlier. There, I deal with a lot of business owners, and people are in business. Families are in business to make a living and make some money, create wealth. But it's not always about how much money or the maximum amount of money. There are other reasons people are in business and people stay in business. So, there's, I think, in some of the material I've read on the website, legacy, is something that pops up a lot. So the existing owners want to see the business continue. Is that a
absolutely,
a big part of it?
Absolutely. And you alluded earlier, Michael, to regional Australia and small business in regional Australia. One of the areas that we're getting a lot of interest is around medical, dental infrastructure.
Okay.
I've got a medical practice. I've got a dental practice in a regional town. I may be the only dental practice for insert square brackets number of kilometres, and I want to actually maintain a sustainable practice for the next 20 years for the town. And that's not about selling it to, even if there were a buyer, it's not about selling it to an organisation that may not have the same ethos around the practice. So there's a lot of interest around medical, dental, and providing that kind of infrastructure in regional Australia, which is absolutely fascinating.
Well, look, it is. It's part of you can't have a viable town without certain businesses in town. They range from decent medical through to perhaps a post office, or perhaps a news agency, or perhaps a bar, or a pub. So that you can see that those owners would not want to leave where they've been for a long time without that service continuing.
And in many instances, they don't necessarily want to stop.
Right.
This is not the binary moment where it's not retirement. It's not the binary moment where I shut the door and I sell it off to someone else and their problem. I want to be involved, but I don't want it to be everything 24/7 in my life. That it's that employee ownership gives you the opportunity to develop that kind of mix where ultimately it may be a complete sell down to the employees, or it may well be that the family keeps an interest in there, and you keep engaged as a founder for some time.
No, great. Look, by the way, we're talking with Andrew Clements from King and Wood Mallesons, who's also chair of Employee Ownership Australia. And I should have mentioned earlier, my co-host David Gregory was unable to make the interview today. So anyway, back to the questions, Andrew. We want to. I'd like to be able to paint a picture of the kind. We talked a little bit there about medical, dental, but what other kinds of typical or normal small businesses have you seen benefit from employee ownership?
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked about the extremes, Michael. We talked about the sort of baby boomer succession version versus the startup version. A really interesting project that I'm actually working on with Graham at the moment is for a consulting firm. And there are 3 founders who are absolutely committed to creating an employee-owned, economically responsible business. And their strong belief is they can best achieve that through engaged employee ownership. Now, interestingly, they come to it with a particular mindset that actually means that the employee ownership piece is really just providing a legal infrastructure to accommodate what they do. Because so much of this is around a mindset. So in terms of a business, it could be consulting, it could be financial services, it could be a manufacturing enterprise.
Okay. And
sorry to interrupt you. The other area that I think is interesting in this context is agriculture, because again, you've got a valuable asset, land, but a business and an owner who may or may not have a desire to keep working the land for the rest of the time and doesn't have a family that wants to take it over. But splitting out the business enterprise versus the land and actually working out a model that has continuing ownership and reward for the employees in the organisation and a level of reward for the landowners is just a really interesting perspective on, rather than I simply sell and move out.
It's a real conundrum, because you've got the same goes for some other types of businesses where there's the real estate, the underlying real estate is really important in the business, and it's no more apparent in agriculture. And if you bought that land 50 or 100 years ago, your cost base is completely different to somebody having to come in and borrow and buy that at today's value. So there's this sort of big yearning gap between what someone could make out of the land and make a living from now versus what somebody else coming in would need to make, borrowing all the money and investing in all of the cost to buy the business. It's really challenging. So with for SMEs, you said that you're seeing a lot more inquiry. Could you talk just at a high level about the employee ownership? We don't want to get into too technical details, but what could it look like? There are different ways to do it?
Absolutely. So to again, at the two ends of the spectrum, there's what I call the allocated share plan. And by allocated, that's the traditional share plan where, Michael, you're an employee. I give you X number of shares in the company. You hold them. You'll get the dividends. You get the growth whilst you're an employee. And when you leave, you may well sell them or you may keep them. But allocated, you actually have the shares. You have the interest, and that's the traditional model that we've looked at in Australia around share ownership within business. The other end of the spectrum is the unallocated model, and that is the essence of the model that Graham Nuttall generated in the UK and got government support and introduced it, and now it's become a mainstream structure. And the difference is that the shares are not held for particular employees. So it's not, Michael, that I gave you 4.2% of the company, but rather I've created a structure whereby a percentage of the share ownership is held for the benefit of employees generally.
Okay. And so the employees can come and go, but it doesn't change. If you're an employee at the time, you get a share of it. If you're not, you don't.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you've alluded to a really important point there, which is employee ownership in the gig economy.
Yeah.
Where suddenly you've got high turnover in the workplace, where a traditional allocated share plan perhaps isn't as effective. So that's why we're beginning to look at these unallocated plans as a means of providing employees with an ability to influence, have some control, and generate some economic benefit.
Okay, so you've been involved in the policy settings in Australia closely. Are we going to? We're coming up to the time where we're going to have to unfortunately close out. But a couple of things I did want to cover before then was the work you've been doing through Employee Ownership Australia. Do you see the cost and complexity for those typical small business owners coming down over the next few years so that it becomes something they can embrace and look at it as a succession, but also to get their business employees involved in the business?
Michael, it is the number one goal that I've got at the moment is to simplify the process of providing employee ownership. And indeed, it was the strong message when we appeared before the Tax and Revenue Committee of the committee. There was a strong desire that said we want to be able to accommodate and do this, and we want to make it as simple as possible.
Okay.
So success is breaking this down to a form where it is accessible to small business without need for a battery of lawyers and accountants. And that has its challenges, but I'm very optimistic given the nature and benefits associated with this. And indeed, the fact that this review came from the Treasurer's office. That we'll see a positive report from the committee and hopefully some form of legislative reform.
So was that originated by that department, or how did that come about?
No. It actually came out of the Office of the Treasurer. So okay. Josh Frydenberg had previously sought a review of the corporate regulation, and by that I mean the rules that allow shares to be offered to people, and that was done last year. But Josh then came and brought forward a review of a parliamentary committee that looks at tax and revenue, which was fundamentally saying, how do we make the tax rules better to, my words, promote, not prevent employee ownership?
Okay, so that's fantastic to hear. For a whole range of reasons. One is that employees play such a critical role in every business, and I think most owners could get a lot more from the business, not just financially, but making it a more, a better functioning workplace, and from having the right employees and having them incented. And it's also, again, with the large number of businesses owned by older owners, we've got to come up with a solution for that. It's it threatens. There's you read various reports, and but look, there's certainly a lot of them. So it's really pleasing to hear. Could we just close out with your final thoughts on what a couple of owners listening in should do to kind of get ready for employee ownership?
Yeah. At the risk of giving a plug, but the Employee Ownership Australia website, there's some really good material on there. There are a series of webcasts on there that look at really the basics of employee ownership. Why? What are the important decisions that you need to make when you go to implement it? And what are the really basic nuts and bolts things that you need to think about? Because I think it's framing that point of view and understanding why you're doing it that generates success.
Yeah, look, I can personally endorse it. I've spent quite a bit of time looking around. It's an excellent resource. So, Andrew, sadly, we need to leave it there. Really appreciate your time, and maybe you could keep us in the loop on how you're tracking. We could get you back in a couple of months. It sounds like it's moving pretty fast, but we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for the opportunity, and certainly I'd love to tell you more.
So that's all for today's episode of Small Business Banter. David and I continue to be inspired by bringing you small business experts and hearing your stories. For any of the links, resources or information we've talked about on the show today, or to contact David or I, please head over to smallbusinessbanter.com. And David and I would love you to tune in at the same time next week for another episode of Small Business Banter.